Do you remember Future Cop LAPD? This crazy little game allowed players to blow everyone and everything to smithereens, but was it just a third-person shooter? Or did it offer the player something completely unique? Well, in this video, we're going to find out. Future Cop LAPD was developed in 1998 by EA and released on the PlayStation and PC. The gameplay did indeed offer more than just a third-person shooting experience, but before we explore how, it might help if you know why the police have a big fat machine that looks like it wants to give you
20 seconds to comply.
The year is 2098, and throughout the 21st century, the world has gone completely tits up, particularly in Los Angeles. Overpopulation, social decay, and crime have all become big problems. And they still are in 2098. There's also been a humongous earthquake which has devastated the city, leaving criminal gangs to take over various areas in the wreckage known as zones. With all that in mind, the Los Angeles Police Department are well over their heads to say the least. The fight against crime is a losing battle, and it's getting worse and worse. How on earth are the LAPD going to take back the streets in such a catastrophically dire situation? Enter Metal Gear. X1 Alpha. The X1 Alpha is a TAC mech which comes equipped with some seriously hardcore firepower, as well as some blue and red flashing police lights. It can be played in two modes, Walker mode and Hovercar mode. Both of these modes have their own unique special abilities, and really, this is where the game becomes more than just a third-person shooter. The player will be presented with situations throughout the game that requires them to use each of the mode's special abilities. For example, if travelling over water, the X1 Alpha will need to be in its hovercar mode because when it's in walker mode, it needs armbands. That being said, when the X1 Alpha is in walker mode, it can jump. This ability is needed to traverse some seriously tricky areas, and in these situations, the game feels more like an action-packed platformer rather than a third-person shooter. To add to the platforming aspect, Future Cop LAPD features a lot of things one might expect to find in a traditional platforming game. These include things like switches, elevators, and obstacles which requires the player to wait. Also, there's a lot of puzzles to solve in Future Cop LAPD, meaning it wasn't always immediately obvious where to go next. The amount of times I would clear an area, then spend way too long wandering around like a lost little lamb trying to work out where to go next, seemed to happen way more often than it should have. Well, if I was actually using my noodle, like you clever people who hit the subscribe button, I would have worked out that there's a map in the start menu which pretty much explains where the objective is. The map contains lots of colourful dots and triangles, and really it does help. But even so, it's not always made obvious where to go. Most of the time, moving forward with or without the map requires some degree of lateral thinking from the player. So, hold on a minute. Platforming? Puzzles? I thought this game was sold as a third-person shooter. Is there some kind of gaming identity crisis going on here? EA? Well, as you can see, there's lots of third-person shooting in Future Cop LAPD. In fact, there's a whole mega multitude of ways to shoot enemies and civilians. Before starting a zone, the player will get to pick their loadout. The X1 Alpha holds 3 types of weapons to protect the brave police officer controlling it. The first of which is a normal gun. Well, I say a normal gun, it's a heavy machine gun, flamethrower, laser, or just something very basic bitch like that. The next is a heavy weapon, which more often than not involves something that fires missiles, or if you find the secret, it fires robot dogs at the enemies. The third type is a special weapon. It's usually something that takes ages to actually hit the target, but to balance that out, it also usually packs a big punch. Because of the speed that special attacks move, it's super effective against stationary targets, but it's not very effective against anything that moves. Now, it's probably worth mentioning at this point that everything I've talked about so far is to do with the main game mode, which is called Crime War. There is another game mode called Precinct Attack, which I know was very popular as well, but before I explain what that is, you may be interested to know just how dangerous the criminals in the zones of Crime War really are. All in all, they've taken over 8 zones, which are all based on real places in LA. These zones range from LA Spaceport, which in the future is where JetBlue fires rockets into space, all the way over to Zuma Beach, which, despite what you think, wasn't named after a man who kicked a... Actually, I'm not going to finish that joke, but if you know, you know. There's no continuous story that develops throughout the game. Each level has its own standalone mission with a boss fight at the end. The bosses themselves are pretty wild as well in this game. Most of them have somehow gained superpowers amongst all the chaos, and this is something the player will have to go up against. The Zone 3 boss, for example, can spawn a flock of hentai dildos to protect herself from the player. Goodness knows where the inspiration came for that, but she is a pain to kill, so I guess if it works, it works. One way to make her, and in fact the rest of the game, easier to play is to do it with a friend in co-op. This game has got an amazing co-op mode, and I know that a lot of you lovely people watching enjoyed this game the most when you played it with a friend or a family member. Please feel free to share your memories in the comments below actually. It would genuinely be awesome to read just how special this game is to you. Multiplayer memories weren't just created in Crime War, they were also created in that other game mode I mentioned earlier called Precinct Assault. In Precinct Assault, 2 players go head to head against each other. One has a blue base and the other has a red base, and the idea is to get one of these hover tanks into the other person's base. It's a lot trickier than it sounds because each base is heavily armed, plus the hover tanks themselves don't actually take much damage to destroy. There's also a single player mode in Precinct Assault where the player goes head to head with a computer controlled character called the Sky Captain. The rules here are the same as they are in multiplayer, except this guy flies around in a blue spacecraft, and unlike your little brother, the Sky Captain gets tougher and tougher each time you win against him. So, now that we've had a chance to take a good look at what this game has to offer, let's re-ask the original question. Was Future Cop LAPD more than just a third-person shooter? Well, I think there's a good case to say it was. The sheer diversity of gameplay that was offered by Future Cop LAPD really was something special. Nothing in this game could ever be considered one-track or linear, and there's proof of this just about everywhere. The fact that there are 2 game modes, or that the X1 Alpha can transform into 2 completely different machines, is evident enough without even mentioning the diverse experience on offer between the single and multiplayer modes. I asked earlier if Future Cop LAPD was having some kind of gaming identity crisis, and really, the answer is no, it wasn't. The platforming and puzzles in this game were just as important as shooting everything in sight was. Putting those 3 core elements together, along with everything else, really does give us our answer. Future Cop LAPD was more than just a third-person shooter. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and please subscribe if you want to see more nostalgic content like this. If you have any games that you want me to make a video for, let me know in the comments and I'll add them to my list. Thanks again, hopefully see you in the next video.